Hi, Community Culture Church. This is the Farmercist on a beautiful Monday afternoon. As you can tell, I'm wearing my coat. Yes, I am a hot nature person, but I'm pretty cold today. It's this weird spring day. I wouldn't think that we'd be in the mid-50s, but we are. Today's video is going to be a little bit unique. It's going to be kind of a catch-all of 5 particular unique tips that we've established over the course of our gardening career. And the number one tip, excuse me, I've got my assistants there with me.
Molly.
Oh, it's never good when we haven't trained her yet to stay out of the garden beds. But tip number one is on irrigation. Obviously, if you're going to have a garden, watering the garden is really important, and it can be very time consuming. And so we put a system together that I'm going to walk you through. This is unscripted, so Cheech, follow me. I'm going to show them what it looks like. So this is kind of the lifeline of our watering garden system. It's an Orbit waterer that we picked up at Lowe's. I think it was around 20 bucks to 22 bucks. And if you factor in how much time you spend on watering your garden on a quarterly basis or a biennial basis when you do have produce growing, you spend a lot of time manually gardening. So we put this in, and we're currently watering 30 minutes a day, twice a day. We're starting at 6 a.m. and 7 p.m. in the afternoon. So it's going to get, it shows you it's going to kick on at 54 minutes. I clean the filter out about weekly. It gets the particulate out. And this is drilled down to a 45 PSI pressure regulator so that it doesn't blow your PEX or your drip irrigation set up in your garden beds that's connected to the PEX. And so from this system, this is a temporary pipe, and I'll show you what we've done at the control valve box. Okay, here's the next step. So it went from that timer into a control valve box. And what I've done here, this is just a temporary setup, obviously with a water hose. Cheech calls this the frog coffin because there's often frogs that die in there. But it's plumbed into a shutoff valve for PEX fittings, and then it goes from a garden hose adapter into the PEX, and then from the PEX it's going to go to every one of these garden beds, and then in the garden beds,
it goes, the PEX runs down the middle, and then to each bed.
Yeah, I put it in there in the rain. Chelsea and I did. It was really fun. But then it goes from the drip hose, the Rainbird drip hose. It has little perforations in it about every foot, and it releases 0.6 gallons of water an hour per foot. And then this is a shut-off valve at the garden bed. So if you want to regulate the garden pressure, you can per bed. So that works really well. So on tip number one, the irrigation, just to recap, basically just have a really simple water digital meter if you can do so. And then later on you can set up a temporary wicking hose or a drip hose, or we use just the drip irrigation system from Rainbird. It does take a little bit of time and effort to administer these and put them in and install them, but after they're installed, we literally spend no time watering, and we can spend more time pruning and keeping up with our garden beds. And that actually leads me to tip number 2 is pruning. Okay, so this morning I woke up and I decided I was going to come out here and prune my zucchini and squash, and lo and behold, I did not take a before photo, so you can't tell how scraggly they were looking, but you can tell the after photo. If you'll come over here and check these out, you can actually view the zucchini. And on these vine trellising plants like the pumpkins and the squash and the zucchini, you'll notice these flowers, now they're more visible to the pollinators, to the bees, so it readily basically allows them to be pollinated easier. One thing you'll see on the older zucchini vines, I cut it off. I leave about 4 inches. I'm really careful to cut back into the stalk of the squash or the zucchini because it basically could leave room for pestilence to get in there. But it's really crucial to get rid of those old unproductive leaves so that you can basically have a healthier plant and maintain a healthier ecosystem with pruning the dead leaves. So with pruning, we talked about the zucchini, and if you look at the squash, the number one disease-related issue with squash or any of these vining plants is that powdery mildew, and that usually sets in with these vining plants when you have a lack of airflow. So pruning helps with that. It helps open up those and release those old leaves that are gone, and it increases the airflow through these plants so that powdery mildew doesn't set in. On the tomatoes too, we talked about this briefly about pruning already and removing those sucker. And I did that again this morning. One cool thing about pruning is that you can use it to your advantage by not only adding to your compost pile with all the leaves that are either eaten up or on the ground, but another trick that I use for tomato plants, let me show you real quick. Is these were suckers that I pruned this morning. They look really, really rough, and it's basically an insurance policy. After 2 or 3 days when the sun comes back out, these will perk back up. And then if anything happens to my tomato plants that are in the ground right now, I've removed this sucker and I've placed it in here in this drum to start growing again for an insurance policy, just in case something happens to one of my tomato plants. So we'll be good to go. So had a ton of questions about trellises, and I'm a big fan of the cow panels just because I got a ton of them laying around the farm. But better yet, it's the most probably economical way to trellis tomatoes. So out of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tomato plants, I got by with basically a panel that's 7 foot long that was 8 foot. I cut one side off, split it in two. It was initially 16 foot long. That cost about 20 bucks. So this is a $10 panel. So all in all, rather than having 50, 60 bucks in tomato cages, I only literally have $7 in a couple of used T-posts for these trellises. So I believe it's the most economical way to trellis your tomatoes and most cost efficient. But also as time goes, we'll start tying these tomato plants up to the trellis. We've got some vegetable string that we'll use to do that, start weaving in our tomato plants through the trellis, and it makes harvesting your tomatoes really, really easy.
Okay, so the next tip, number 4 from Farmercist, is spacing. It's important that whenever you're first planting your garden beds or your tubs or whatever you're planting in, that you're going to see a lot of extra room because your plants are so small when you're first planting them, or the seeds. But don't take that as, oh, I have more room to plant more plants. Make sure you're following the correct spacing for the plants, because if you overcrowd...
And social distancing.
And social distancing. If you overcrowd them, they're going to not produce as well. They're not going to reach their full potential, I guess you could say. So this is an example of kale that is properly spaced and needs to be harvested. Some spinach that's properly spaced, and some romaine plants over here that are properly spaced. And I've already taken 2 harvests off of all of these plants, and you can see how large they are still. I planted the extras that we had in a tub over there, and I'm going to show you the difference in the size because they're really overcrowded and they're not doing as well. So I'm going to show you. You can obviously see the difference in the size of this kale. And this one's really puny. These are pretty puny. They're just crowded in here. They're not doing as well, and they just haven't produced as much. These are overcrowded versus the correct spacing. So just make sure that whenever you're first planting, that you're not crowding everything. If it says space it a foot apart, I would really follow that recommendation.
Okay, so tip number 5. It is something I struggled with for a really long time. I used to use a ton of petroleum-based products and chemicals and pesticides to nuke all these microscopic nuisance. But as time has went on, I've really tried to get away from that. I've become more aware of the chemicals that we're putting in our body. As a pharmacist, I pretty much understand the ramification of chemicals in your own physiology, but I wasn't heating that within our food. And so as we look forward to, I have not figured out a cure for this pest though. I don't know how to get rid of that out of my garden. I gotta figure that one out. But as time has went on, I use strategies to get rid of ants and some other pests, and it's actually really inhumane and horrible if you're an ant lover. But we boil water, get it boiling, and I had 2 ant hills, and you've got to really trace the little ants to where they're going back into their ant colony. As you see, this is an ant colony that I poured boiling water on, and yes, I literally cooked every one of the ants. The problem with that is
some carrots.
I also had a nice little roll of carrots right here, and I also cooked the carrots, so a few of them survived in that row, but really it instantly got rid of the ants. And so that does work if you get ant accumulation. And one strategy is not to let it go too long. If you start seeing a little new ant mound or build up, get on it quick. Use boiling water to get rid of them. There's some other strategies that you can Google on non-invasive, chemical-free, pest-free implementations for your garden. Chemical-free.
To get pest-free.
To get pest-free. Thank you. You'll notice Chelsea just didn't plant these marigolds. For not only are they pretty, but they also attract aphids. And I look at like the ladybugs of the garden. They're kind of your special forces. They come out, and all these squash bugs and all these nasty pestilence that poke holes and eat holes in all of our vegetables, they basically eat those. So ladybugs are a friend. There is a difference between a ladybug and the Chinese beetle. Don't ask me. Asian beetle, sorry.
Coronavirus.
Yeah, don't go there. Okay guys, I just wanted to show you that this thing actually works. So we've got some before evidence last week when you didn't see anything sprouting, and now our potatoes are actually coming out of our potato towers. So all you doubters out there that didn't think that this would work, I just wanted to send this clip to you to show you that there are potatoes that are sprouting out of our tower.